7th episode of Stronger NC's video series, This is What Democracy Looks Like. I'm Kate Gavigan, and I'm guest hosting this month as we talk about environmental and energy issues in North Carolina. If you visit our website, you'll be able to check out the toolkit we put together on this topic. It will have a lot more background than what we'll be able to discuss today, along with some follow-up. With me today is Rachael Estes, and she is the Climate and Energy Policy Manager for the North Carolina Conservation Network. Rachael, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Catherine, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and discuss these important issues with you.
Thanks so much. To get started, can you just take a minute to tell us a little bit about the North Carolina Conservation Network and your work there? And also just a little bit about what got you involved in environmental affairs.
Sure. So the North Carolina Conservation Network started about 20 years ago. As I'm sure you're aware, North Carolina is actually a pretty progressive state in the South when it comes to a lot of different issues, but particularly environmental. So about 20 years ago, there were 60 different environmental groups throughout the state that were working on a myriad of different issues. And there were some duplication efforts and some miscommunications, and they came together and decided we really need a central hub to communicate these efforts and to become more efficient and streamlined. And so that's how the network started. So we have groups that are as large and national, like the Sierra Club and Environmental Defense Fund, to really small nonprofits and river keepers and the like. So my role there at the North Carolina Conservation Network is really to focus on energy issues, clean energy issues. I do a lot of policy work in that area. I lobby the General Assembly on those issues. But I also do a fair amount of convening of the different groups on specific issues to make sure that we're all communicating and getting our priorities in line and all of that.
Because now you're about 100 groups, aren't
Yes.
you? From the mountains to the sea.
That's right.
As we like to say in North Carolina.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, we have over 100 groups now as affiliates of our organization.
That's fantastic. So that's a lot of opportunities for you guys to share knowledge and to work together synergistically and not duplicate efforts.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. Well, I know you and I talked a little bit earlier, and environmental issues in North Carolina touch on, it just encompasses so many things. It's everything from clean energy and renewable energy to pollution prevention, trying to ensure that our drinking water is safe, that the air we breathe is safe, to habitat conservation for endangered species and land conservation. So just very broadly, why do you think, as citizens of the state, why should we be concerned about these issues? Sure.
So I think there's a few different, very important reasons why. I think first and foremost, the environment is really, if you think about it, the only public good that everybody consumes.
Right.
So you have education, but some people may not have children, or may not go to public school. Everybody breathes air and everybody drinks water. And it's a resource that we have to decide how we're going to manage it properly. And when not managed properly, lives are lost. The environment is destroyed and damaged, and we only have one planet. We only have one environment. So we don't really get a second shot at that. So I think from that aspect, protecting the environment is a public health issue on local issues like your drinking water, air pollution, toxins in everyday environment, but then also on a global level with climate change. It's extremely important now. And North Carolina is actually particularly vulnerable to climate change. We have a coast where we're going to be affected by a sea level rise. Our agricultural industry is an $80 billion industry.
Wow.
That is already seeing effects of climate change from crop yields loss. We also have a $20 billion tourism industry from the coast to the mountains. The mountains have been dealing with wildfires and flooding down east.
Some drought
Drought,
in the mountains,
absolutely.
right?
So we're seeing all of this come together, and we're seeing its effect on business in North Carolina, and then of course loss of lives as well. And then also North Carolina is actually a major retirement state.
Yeah.
And we have, I believe it's the third largest population of seniors in the country.
I did not know that.
And
that's amazing.
seniors are particularly vulnerable to climate change as well, from the drastic natural disasters and as well as the heat waves and that we see as well. So the environment really is important.
It's everybody.
The food you're eating on your table to climate change going around globally.
Well, so some of the issues that you mentioned when you're talking about pollution prevention, I know a lot of this we see in the news every day. I mean, as it relates specifically to North Carolina, in the news this week, we've got Gen X in the Cape Fear River Basin, and that's a drinking water source. Leaking hog waste lagoons. Down east, we've got the coal ash issue with the unlined coal pits. So a question that comes up is, we've had comprehensive environmental legislation at the federal level and at the state level for decades. Really since Richard Nixon established the EPA and some of that early legislation in the 70s. So you look at some of this stuff in the news and you think, well, isn't there regulation for that? Why do we have Gen X in the drinking water? Why do we have the coal pits spilling into the Dan River? Like, why are these things still happening?
Sure. So one pattern that we're seeing and have seen throughout the years is a traumatic event occurs, a public health crisis occurs. People are up in arms, they're upset, legislators take action, they put through regulations to prevent that from happening again. People become complacent in that they take for granted that the air they're breathing is clean and the water they're drinking is clean. Regulations begin to become loosened, and then another public health crisis occurs. And we've seen this, lead is an issue we dealt with years and years and years ago, and now we see this drinking water lead crisis in Flint, Michigan, and actually in North Carolina, after 30 years of decline, we've seen lead levels rise in children over the last couple of years. We've seen this obviously with Gen X, with coal ash. I used to work for a member of Congress from Florida on the Energy and Commerce Committee during the BP oil spill.
Oh my goodness.
And that was, as you can imagine, just disastrous for her district, for the Gulf. And that uncovered a lot of regulations that had been loosened and not even the ones that still were on the books, not properly enforced.
So you're saying that the legislation is passed, the regulations are enacted, but then once the crisis is over, it sounds like it comes back to the legislators. I know we've had quite a bit of deregulation in North Carolina, let's say since about 2011. So that brings me to the question, sometimes the way these issues are pitched, it's almost as though environmental regulation is counter to economic development. And there might be a call for, we need regulatory reform, we need less regulation. Is there an argument for that not being the case? What we've seen, with our legislation in North Carolina, this loosening of regulations is leading to some of these issues you're talking about, like Gen X and coal ash.
Sure. So that's an argument that's used oftentimes against regulations, but it's funny, when I worked on the Hill, I actually worked during the cap and trade bill going through Congress, and the number one thing I heard from industry was, we want certainty.
Right.
We need certainty. So if this is going to happen, we have to plan 10 and 20 years ahead. And so a lot of times legislators think that they're doing a good thing for business by coming in and taking away these regulations. But for the businesses that have to plan for 20 years ahead, they can't change their rules every time there's an election.
Like that.
It's just, it's not good business. And so the feedback I received was, as long as we're all on the same level playing field and everyone in the industry is held to these same standards, and as long as you're not going to pull the rug from under us and change it from year to year, they can adapt. And the other thing too is, no business wants to have a river on fire, which is what it took for the EPA to become a government agency, right? it doesn't matter, how many financial incentives you're going to give a business. If they're going to try to lure employees to come to a city that doesn't have clean drinking water, that's an economic problem.
And that's a big issue for North Carolina, because we are, a cutting edge technology state. In fact, for clean tech and for solar power, we're second in the country. For clean tech, we're in the top 10. So these industries as well, not just the industries where the regulation is maybe shifting under their feet, which it's interesting, that just came up with the new fuel efficiency standards perhaps being changed, the mandate being changed, and the auto industry saying, but wait, we're 10 years out on this already.
Right.
And California saying, we're going to stick with this path. So you do get that. Right. I see what you mean about getting that uncertainty, and that's difficult for business. But also, can you talk a little bit about some of the economic benefits to the state of North Carolina associated with clean technology and renewable energy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, North Carolina, like you said, we're second in solar in the nation. We're very proud of that. North Carolina, I think it's a $6 billion industry for clean energy. They now employ about 35,000 people, and these are good, clean paying jobs.
Right.
So these are, high wages. And the other thing too is a lot of the solar farms, for instance, are in rural tier 1 counties.
Okay.
And so these are counties that have seen just a complete decrease in jobs and economic prosperity over the years. And now these solar farms are coming back, and they're paying farmers $500-600 an acre to lease their land, which, is stable income. These farmers are no longer dependent upon, the crop yields from year to year. And it's clean energy. And just to give you one example, the Amazon wind farm down east in Pasquotank and Chelan counties is the #1 taxpayer for those counties.
Wow.
And I believe they received about $500,000 for that, just the tax basis on that wind farm. And that was a huge boost to those tier 1 counties.
Exactly. And those are jobs that are now highly in demand. In fact, I just saw the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the #2 in demand job in the nation is wind turbine mechanics, which it's not a lot of training. It's a couple of years of school, but it's a very high paying job. And I do know that for our coastal region, we've got the wind, and it's early for the wave technology, the in-water wave technology turbines as well, but we've been assessed at a really high potential for that. So let me ask you this, getting back to some of these issues, and it seems to make business sense, and what seems to make sense for public health and for managing our resources long term. What's the missing link here? What needs to happen, and at what level, for us to have follow through on these issues that seem pretty commonsensical from the viewpoint of public health and economic development?
Sure. I think that there's a few different things. I think one, this cycle that I talked about earlier, or this pattern of public health crisis, solve it, it's solved, undue regulations, let it go, that we've seen. I mean, in North Carolina specifically, if you probably remember the acid rain that we had in the mountains, and this clean smokestacks law was passed in 2002. And did a wonderful job at lowering the NOx emissions, the sulfur dioxide emissions, to help heal the Blue Ridge and bring back tourism and all that. And it's done a phenomenal job. And then the legislature came in 2011, and passed legislation that restricted North Carolina from passing any environmental regulation that's more stringent than the federal. And so that
Which is such a shame, because
what you worked so hard for.
Right, particularly if mentioning that clean tech industry, if we are growing an industry and then we can be exporting that technology domestically and internationally, but then the legislation undoes the need for the technology. It seems too, economically, we know that, yes, there is a cost to regulation in the short term for a company, but there's also a cost to pollution.
Absolutely. There's an externality. So what's been happening is basically we all pay for that. So it's a tax on the taxpayer, basically.
Right.
That the businesses are putting onto us through pollution, through tainting our drinking water through that they're not paying the full cost of business.
Just like with the Gen X scenario, I know there's been debate, and the governor's spoken about funds becoming available to clean up Gen X, yet it was one business that dumped it. So presumably there was an economic benefit for that private entity.
Absolutely.
To very cheaply get rid of that waste, but then it's the taxpayer, one, cleaning it up now in a really dispersed kind of thing versus one or several emission pipes. Now you have the whole river system.
It's shifting costs.
It's shifting the costs and the health effects.
Right.
That's really, it seems a little bit like preventative health care. If you can prevent the pollution, that's going to be easier and cheaper than trying to clean up something like, whether it's like the BP oil spill or something like Gen X or the coal ash in the Dan River or the leaking. I keep coming back to these certain issues because they've been in the news so much recently, but they all seem to have multi-million-dollar price tags for cleanup.
Absolutely. It's the classic go get your teeth cleanings so you don't have to have a root canal.
Yes.
It's better for everybody, and the environment is the same way, and it is cheaper. Preventative measures are cheaper. Keeping our buffers in place so that the runoff can get filtered before it hits our waterway is much, much less expensive than trying to clean up a river system that has a billion fish kills in the news, for instance, which is what we went through in the 90s.
Right.
So absolutely, and cleaning up lead in drinking water, and then the effects that it takes on its toll on human loss of life and developmental
certainly
issues.
The health effects associated with some of these constituents that have yet to be regulated, but the health effects are they're demonstrable. They've been proven in the medical research. So for individuals to find out their kids have been drinking that water, I agree with you. I think that a lot of people don't know that. There is the presumption that you turn on your tap. Throughout the United States, you can just drink water out of the tap, and that's not the case everywhere in the world. But if it's maybe not even the case in the United States, that's scary. That's disconcerting.
Right. And we're seeing a trend again of, okay, well, the air is safe for now. For instance, the legislature just passed legislation to reduce our air monitors. We had 125, and now they've reduced them to 75 because they're not necessary anymore. They will become necessary as we continue to pollute again.
Right. It's sort of trying to find this short-term cost cutting, but it's really not cost cutting. It's
penny-wise,
just
pound
passing.
foolish.
It's penny-wise, pound foolish, right? Well, now let me ask you this, because I know we just have a couple of minutes. So Stronger NC, a big focus of the work at Stronger NC is to inform citizens and help them figure out how they can engage in the civic process, how they can be more informed and more participatory. So what would you suggest to citizens that, for those goals, to be more informed and more involved?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's your right as a citizen to contact your representative, and I think that not enough people do. Like I told you earlier, I did work for a representative before, and it's amazing how few constituents actually reach out. And I think it's very powerful and it's very important. So I would definitely recommend on these issues contacting your legislator, whether it's a call or writing a letter. Also go meet with your representative.
Do they pay attention to that, Rachel?
They do.
You having worked in a congressperson's office, if you're calling, if you're sending email, if you're writing, do they pay attention to that? What do you do to be better heard?
They do, and the reason why is because so many constituents don't.
Okay.
That when all of a sudden they're seeing this flood of emails, they recognize, okay, my constituents clearly care about this issue because it does happen so infrequently.
Okay.
I would say they do get form letters a lot, so that individual call, that indivial letter probably goes a little further if you have the time
to personalize something.
To personalize it. I also think issues you care about deeply, to go visit your representative. That's what they're there for. Oftentimes people I've heard didn't even realize that they could do that. You don't have to be from an organization. You don't have to be a registered lobbyist. You have a right to go speak to your representative on issues that are affecting your district and that matter to you and your family.
Right.
And I think more people should take advantage of that opportunity. Obviously, go vote. That's where you vote with your feet.
Right, and you at an organization that is really like a collective of 100 different groups, it seems like there's a lot of opportunities for people to volunteer with organizations in maybe a number of different capacities. I think that's up on our website, on the toolkit, a number of organizations and how people can get involved in these issues.
Absolutely, and we're all busy, we all have lives, so if it's helpful, in my role and in my organization as well, we let our members know what bills are coming up that may be of interest to them. I think Stronger NC has information as well on what's going through the legislature in case there's something someone wants to take action on, because I understand it can be pretty daunting to, no one has time to check into the legislature every day and see what's happening.
But there are organizations that follow, by issue or just as a whole, what is happening, and we're going to reconvene in mid-May, our state General Assembly for the short session, and I think there are some environmental issues pending that are going to be...
I think Gen X is going to be the largest one. Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, the governor has requested $14.5 million for Gen X funding, so we'll see what will happen.
Right. Well, those are great tips for citizens for following up. And again, I'd like to encourage people to check out the toolkit that's live on our site right now, both the Facebook page and strongernc.org. And I want to thank Rachael Estes very much for being here today and sharing her expertise and her time.
Thank you for having me. It was
yes. And thanks all of you for listening today.